The American flag flapped proudly atop her neighbor's 30-foot pole. But for Karen, this was war. She called the HOA, the city, even the governor himself. And now, the most powerful man in the state stood in her quiet suburban neighborhood, ready to raise the flag with his own hands. This was no longer about a silly pole. It was a fight for the soul of their community, and the battle lines had been drawn. Karen stared up at the massive American flag, its vibrant colors mocking her from its lofty perch. How dare her neighbor flaunt that symbol of freedom and patriotism, when it was clearly intended to antagonize her? She clenched her fist, her knuckles turning white. This was unacceptable. Storming back into her immaculate home, Karen frantically dialed the number for the homeowners association. Her fingers trembled as she listened to the ringtone, her heart pounding with a mixture of outrage and determination. "Hello, this is Karen from 456 Maple Street," she said, her voice tight with barely contained fury. "I'm calling to report a clear violation of our neighborhood covenants. My neighbor has erected an absolutely massive flagpole and is flying the American flag in a way that is disruptive and offensive to the entire community." The HOA representative listened patiently, then replied in a calm, measured tone. "I understand your concern, ma'am. However, the display of the American flag is protected under the Freedom to Display the American Flag Act. Unless the flagpole itself violates our height restrictions, there is little we can do." Karen's face flushed with anger. "This is unacceptable. That eyesore is ruining the aesthetic of our lovely neighborhood. I demand that you take action immediately." "I'm sorry, but my hands are tied on this matter," the representative said. "Perhaps you could try speaking with your neighbor directly to see if you can come to some sort of compromise." Compromise? The very thought made Karen's blood boil. She slammed the phone down, nearly cracking the screen. There was no way she was going to back down. This was war. Over the next few days, Karen became a woman possessed. She made call after call, volleying angry demands and threats to anyone who would listen. The mayor's office, the city council, even the governor's mansion. No one was safe from her relentless campaign. Her neighbor, Mark, watched the spectacle with a growing sense of bewilderment. He had simply wanted to display the flag he loved, to honor the country he had served. But now, his quiet suburban life had been transformed into a full-blown media circus. "I don't understand why she's making such a big deal out of this," Mark said to his wife, Linda, as they sipped their morning coffee. "It's just a flagpole. It's not hurting anyone." Linda placed a comforting hand on his arm. "I know, honey. But you know how Karen is. She's always been like this, looking for any excuse to stir up trouble. We just have to ride it out and hope she gets bored eventually." But Karen showed no signs of backing down. In fact, her efforts only seemed to intensify. She organized neighborhood protests, plastered flyers all over the community, and even filed a formal complaint with the city's zoning department. Mark watched in dismay as the simple act of displaying the American flag became a full-blown culture war, with his home as the battleground. He knew he had to do something, but what? As the tension in the neighborhood reached a fever pitch, Karen decided to up the ante. She gathered a group of her closest allies and marched to the state capitol, determined to take her case all the way to the top. "This is a clear violation of our community standards," she declared to the assembled reporters, her voice shrill and accusatory. "My neighbor is using the American flag as a weapon to intimidate and harass the rest of us. We demand that the governor step in and put a stop to this outrageous display immediately." The governor, a seasoned politician with a keen eye for public opinion, listened carefully to Karen's impassioned plea. He understood the delicate balance between individual rights and community harmony, and knew that this was a battle he couldn't afford to lose. "I hear your concerns, ma'am," he said, his tone measured and diplomatic. "The flag is a symbol of our nation's greatest ideals, and every citizen has the right to display it proudly. However, I also recognize the importance of maintaining a cohesive and peaceful community. Perhaps we can find a solution that respects everyone's interests. Karen's eyes narrowed, and she opened her mouth to deliver another scathing retort. But before she could speak, the governor raised his hand, silencing her. "I will personally visit your neighborhood and assess the situation," he said. "If there is a reasonable compromise to be found, I will work with all parties to ensure a peaceful resolution." Karen's allies murmured in surprise, their momentum suddenly deflated. The governor's intervention was not what they had expected, and the prospect of a reasonable compromise was far from what they had in mind. As the governor's motorcade pulled into the quiet suburban neighborhood, Karen and her allies gathered anxiously on the sidewalk. They had been caught off guard by the governor's swift response, and now they worried that their carefully crafted narrative might unravel before their eyes. Mark and Linda, meanwhile, watched the spectacle unfold with a mixture of trepidation and hope. They knew that the governor's presence could be a double-edged sword, and they prayed that he would see the truth of their situation. The governor stepped out of his car, flanked by a small entourage of aides and security personnel. He surveyed the scene with a practiced eye, taking in the meticulously manicured lawns, the neatly trimmed hedges, and the imposing flagpole that stood at the center of the dispute. "Quite a display you have here, my friend," the governor said, addressing Mark directly. "I must say, it's a rather impressive piece of craftsmanship." Mark felt a surge of pride, but he quickly tempered his response. "Thank you, sir. I simply wanted to honor my country and my service, but it seems I've stirred up quite a hornet's nest." The governor nodded thoughtfully. "Yes, I can see that. Now, Ms. Karen, if I may ask, what exactly is the nature of your complaint?" Karen stepped forward, her shoulders squared and her chin held high. "Governor, this flagpole is a blatant violation of our community's aesthetic standards. It's an eyesore that detracts from the overall beauty and harmony of our neighborhood. We simply can't have this kind of ostentatious display disrupting our way of life." The governor listened intently, his expression unreadable. Then, with a slight nod, he turned to Mark. "And what do you have to say in response?" Mark took a deep breath, aware that all eyes were on him. "Governor, I served this country for over 20 years, putting my life on the line to defend the very freedoms that we're now debating. The American flag is not just a symbol to me. It's a representation of the values and ideals that I dedicated my life to upholding." He paused, his gaze sweeping across the gathered crowd. "When I came home and settled in this neighborhood, I wanted to continue honoring that legacy. This flagpole is a source of pride, not just for me, but for all who have sacrificed to protect our way of life." Karen scoffed, her arms crossed defiantly. "That's all well and good, Mr. Mark, but your personal feelings don't trump the collective interests of this community. We have standards and covenants in place for a reason, to maintain the character and aesthetic of our neighborhood. Your flag is an eyesore, and it's causing nothing but trouble." The governor held up a hand, silencing Karen. "I understand your concerns, Ms. Karen, but I'm afraid I can't simply dismiss Mr. Mark's rights as a veteran and a citizen. The display of the American flag is a protected form of expression, and I'm not inclined to intervene unless there is a clear and egregious violation of the law." Karen's face flushed with anger, and she opened her mouth to protest, but the governor continued. "However, I do believe that we can find a reasonable compromise that takes into account the needs and desires of the entire community. Perhaps we can work together to find a more suitable location for the flagpole or explore ways to mitigate its visual impact." Mark felt a surge of hope, while Karen's allies exchanged nervous glances. The battle lines had been drawn, and the stakes were higher than ever. Over the next several days, the neighborhood became a battleground, as Karen and her allies fought tooth and nail against the governor's proposed compromise. They held rallies, circulated petitions, and bombarded local media outlets with their message of community outrage. Mark and Linda, meanwhile, found themselves at the center of a maelstrom of public scrutiny. Neighbors who had once greeted them warmly now eyed them with suspicion, and they received a steady stream of angry phone calls and threatening messages. I don't understand why they're so obsessed with this, Linda said, her voice tinged with frustration. It's just a flagpole, for goodness sake. Can't they find something more important to worry about? Mark wrapped his arm around her, offering a reassuring squeeze. I know, honey. But you know how it is. Some people just can't stand the idea of anyone being different, or challenging the status quo. All we can do is stay strong and keep fighting for what we believe in. As the tension mounted, the governor's office worked tirelessly to broker a compromise. They proposed moving the flagpole to a less prominent location, or even reducing its height to lessen its visual impact. But Karen and her allies refused to budge, insisting that the only acceptable solution was the complete removal of the offending structure. The standoff stretched on for weeks, with both sides digging in deeper with each passing day. It was a battle of wills, with the future of the neighborhood hanging in the balance. As the sun rose on a crisp autumn morning, the neighborhood awoke to a sight that would shake it to its core. The massive American flag on Mark's flagpole had been cut down, its shredded tatters lying in a heap on the ground. Mark and Linda rushed outside, their faces etched with a mixture of shock and outrage. What in the world happened? Linda cried, surveying the damage. A note had been left on their doorstep, scrawled in an anonymous hand. This is your last warning. Take down that eyesore or face the consequences. Mark's jaw tightened, his fists clenching at his sides. This is an outrage. We can't let them get away with this. Linda placed a calming hand on his arm. Honey, we need to call the police. This is vandalism, plain and simple. We can't retaliate. That will only make things worse. As the authorities arrived on the scene, Karen and her allies watched from the sidelines, their expressions a mix of triumph and thinly veiled guilt. They had not anticipated the scale of the backlash, the way the nation would rally behind a humble veteran's right to display the flag. The governor, too, was dismayed by the turn of events. He had hoped to find a peaceful resolution, but now the battle lines had been drawn with violence. He knew he had to act quickly to prevent the situation from spiraling further out of control. In the days that followed, the governor took decisive action. He convened a special task force to investigate the flag's destruction, and personally reached out to Mark and Linda, offering his full support and resources. This act of vandalism is unacceptable, the governor declared, his voice firm and resolute. The American flag is a symbol of our nation's highest ideals, and its desecration will not be tolerated. We will find the perpetrators and bring them to justice. Karen and her allies, meanwhile, found themselves thrust into the national spotlight, their once local dispute now a matter of national concern. As the media descended on the neighborhood, they scrambled to control the narrative, desperately trying to portray themselves as the victims of an overzealous flag-waving display. But their efforts fell flat as the public rallied behind Mark and Linda, hailing them as symbols of patriotism and resilience in the face of petty neighborhood politics. The governor's steadfast support only added fuel to the fire, as he vowed to protect the rights of all citizens to display the American flag. In the end, the flagpole was rebuilt, and the American flag once again fluttered proudly above the neighborhood. Karen and her allies, their efforts thwarted and their reputations tarnished, retreated into the shadows, their dreams of community domination shattered. The lesson was clear. In the battle for the soul of a community, the true victor was not the one who wielded the most power, but the one who stood firm in their convictions, unwavering in their defense of the ideals that make America great.